Welcome to Beyond the Breakwater, where just beyond the crashing waves of fear, discomfort, and doubt lies the greatest potential for life transformation. We want to guide you into the open waters where the calculated risk you take becomes the turning point for you or your organization to thrive. So draw up your anchors and prepare for departure in this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater. Okay, welcome back to another episode of Beyond the Breakwater. I am Lyndsay and this is Ed, and today we're going to be talking about principles. So Ed, we've been talking about a lot of concepts and ideas so far, right?
Yeah, there's been a lot to talk about with all the things that are going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so I think we've been kind of talking through those ideas, talking through our past, our history, encouraging churches as they're starting to make some shifts. But with that, we had some listeners kind of come to us and say like, okay, this is great, but I need pen to paper. I need some principles written down. I want to like think through these things. As we've been hosting pastors, we've been having a couple like 1 or 2 day events where we'll invite folks down and kind of go through a presentation and then invite them and have an experience into all of the ministries. So that's kind of also raised a lot of really interesting questions where now we can leave them with, here's a paper front and back of principles. And it's not necessarily going to say, here's step 1 to starting a grocery store, but it at least gives them a place to start and something to think about.
Yeah, the principles are really important because we find that the principles are universal. We've experienced when people come and churches will come or pastors will come, churches will come and they'll look at one of the ministries and they're thinking, I can't necessarily do this. And it doesn't matter how many times we tell them, like, it's not the ministry, it's not the end product that they should be really looking at. It would be the application of the principles. Mm-hmm. Because when they start learning the principles, and I know we've covered them over the course of this last year, we've covered a lot of them, but the principles can be used in any context, in any culture, any people group, anywhere, urban, rural, suburban. It doesn't matter the ministry that they're doing. So I love it that we've really reduced this down to the principles so that when we take them out to the garage, we can actually say, what principles do you see being applied out in the garage? And we're hoping that they're going to take the principles back.
Yeah, and I think that kind of raised something for us in a new principle. It's not new to us, but it was new to the page where it was like, oh, we haven't talked about this, and this is a really good question and things for churches or leaders to think about as they start making shifts in their ministry. So it happened when we were out at the garage, and we were just kind of showing them like, okay, this is, how many bays is it? 8 bays. Okay. So it's a pretty decent size square footage. What, 1,500?
5,000 square feet. It's actually 10 bays, but we actually have 8 bays that we have cars in.
Okay. So it's big.
It is a big garage.
They were out there and they were just like, wow, like this is great. So as we're starting to think about like starting something, maybe it's not the garage, they ask the question, like, how is this marketed? Like, is this something that you are pushing through the church social medias? Is it on the church's website? How many people now come to your church because of it? So these questions were coming up, and it just kind of, so I'm doing all of the like communications and marketing for the church. You had established this in place long before I got here. So I'm just kind of inheriting this model or these principles. But actually, we don't market it through the church. This is not Messiah Church's auto garage. It's His Hands Auto. And His Hands Auto has a separate Facebook page. They have a separate Instagram page. They have a whole separate website. And yes, it is a little bit through the church's website and the church's social media page just to bring people into that from our congregation. But that's the way all of the ministries have been set up. It's not Messiah Church's grocery store, Messiah Church's auto garage, Messiah Church's healthcare clinic. They are all separate in and of themselves. And so, Ed, what has that allowed people to do with that being a separate thing?
I think sometimes people want to attach it to the church. And I think there's a danger in that. Let's go back. You've used the garage as an example. So when we open up the garage, we told the church it's not for them. It's for the community. And so for the first year, we kept telling them about the ministry impact of the garage, what it's doing, how it's for the community. And it wasn't until 1 year later that we actually went back to the church and said, oh, by the way, if you'd like to get your car worked on at the garage, whether as a customer, which is full paying, or as a client because they're in need, they could actually get their car worked on. So from the square one, we established that this is a missional opportunity. This is for the community. It's not for the church. And it's amazing how even today, wasn't a couple months ago, I was talking to somebody and we had talked about the auto garage and they said, oh, that's a really nice thing for your members. And I started to laugh and I'm like, no, it's not. It's not for the church. It was never for the church. It was for the community. But we were able to leverage the resources of Messiah. So we actually, when we built it, we put it out in the backyard. It's one of the only ministries that are on premises. And we did that because we wanted to save money. We had no money when we opened up the garage. We had a large debt. The church was in debt, $5.2 million when I got here. And so having no money and a big dream, when we started the garage and started building the garage, we already had a parking lot in the back. We already had the land. We attached the utilities to the church so that the church is paying the utilities for the garage. By being on the same property, liability insurance, everything was all attached to the church. So we really, the church absorbed all of the expenses of the garage so that the garage could actually function. So even though it's on the premises and everything, we set it up as this is not for the church, it is for the community.
Why is that important for it to be for the community and not the church?
Well, I think we're going to get into a deeper conversation, but I think you're opening up the door for this, that when churches do something and they put a stake in the ground and they name it after their church, oftentimes the other churches run for the hills. There's just something in churches of all places don't work together well. You would think that in the faith-based community, in the church community, that when one church does something that all other churches would probably want to work together. It's actually the opposite. And so we've worked really hard to overcome this, that when we start a ministry like a garage ministry, that's way beyond the local church. It's for the community and supported by the community, that by not putting the church name on it, it allows others to come in and play in the same sandbox.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to look at things. And I don't know, I'm kind of at a loss for words right now just because I had a couple different questions rolling around in my mind. Okay, so by not putting a stake in the ground, you're saying other churches can come and participate in it.
Yes.
Has that been something that like all along people kind of subconsciously, or are there any undertones where like anybody who is coming into, let's say, the Bridge grocery store, are they like, oh, this is Messiah's? Or are they like affiliating it with other churches? Like what has that done for the church?
We try to keep our name out of it. People still want to attach it to us. I think the way that we've structured, and I think the Bridge Food Center is a really good example of this. Even though Messiah is the quiet engine, that we're providing the support for it, we're providing the finances, the accounting, the liability, the insurance, the direction over it. We have, by not calling it Messiah or having any semblance of Messiah anywhere near the building, we've invited other churches to come along and be a part of the ministry. So like our supervisors are actually from different churches in the community. And that has actually helped us immeasurably, because when people come in and maybe they've heard and they're like, oh, this is Messiah's, we're like, no, actually. And then we introduce them to our supervisors and say, no, the supervisors, they go to a different church. And so they've come over here with volunteers and with help, and they're serving too. So it truly has become a community ministry.
Are you selective in the churches that can and cannot participate?
No, we've gone into the community inviting churches. We're in a unique position with the Bridge. I think I love the Bridge uniqueness of all the ministries that we do, because we can go into another church and invite that church to come over and serve for a day. Just come check it out. Bring a group of volunteers. fill the schedule and bring your volunteers, 4 or 5 volunteers. And the bridge is set up in such a way that if we have 5 volunteers come in, our supervisor can teach them how to run everything in the store in minutes. And then the supervisor can really just be busy doing their own thing. And this church is running the whole grocery store all by themselves. So when we've done that with churches, now churches are like, can we come back again? Can we come back again? So the bridge actually has been able to go into a church and say, can we help you as a church fulfill your God-given purpose to serve the community around you? And we've invited them to come in with no dollars, no startup, no responsibility. Just, can you come in with some volunteer people and take the credit for running the store, and you can go away and go, wow, this is amazing. We got to run the store today. And it's set up that way. In fact, our dream for the bridge is we like to have Monday be one church, another Tuesday maybe be another church. Wednesday is our corporate day where we invite businesses to come in and they run the grocery store. Thursday, Friday, Saturday. So we'd like to have a 6-day ministry as we move into the new building, which is coming up in a few weeks.
So I'm imagining like that is a really beautiful picture of like multiple churches working really well together. I think maybe some of the reason that churches have been like planted, like there are like 150 churches here in Midland. And the reason why those have like sprung up, correct me if I'm wrong, but hypothesis maybe is just like difference of theology, difference of doctrine. And so I think that has been like, as I've been also working with other churches on like different young adult things, there's just been questions of things where it's like, okay, well, what if we don't want to like send people to your church because we don't believe in that doctrine? And so how does that tension play out in the bridge, where if you're not being selective with the churches who are coming, like if it is a church so like far removed from your belief, is there a concern at all for the customers who are coming into the bridge that they might be attending there and led astray?
I don't know if your concern is maybe for the extreme, because some churches are maybe a little bit more extreme. But for the most part, I mean, the command is to love God with all your heart and love your neighbors yourself. We found that just loving your neighbor is pretty universal. It doesn't matter what flavor you are. It doesn't matter what your theology is. It doesn't matter what you believe about certain things in the scriptures. When it comes to, can you show compassion to this person? Can you serve this person? Can you check them out at the register? Can you walk their groceries out with them? Can you say, how are you? Can you give a hug? Maybe even pray with somebody. I don't think in 7.5 years of being part of the bridge that it's ever once been a question. But the beauty is, I have to say too, I think it's, I want to go the flip side of that. It doesn't matter who you are, because people who come to the bridge, some of their lives are pretty messed up. And if we want to talk from a theological basis, they come from all walks of life, and it doesn't matter. And they come in and sometimes they will tell us who they are or what's going on in their life, and they broadcast it to the world of some kind of an identity. It doesn't matter, because we're there to love them first as a volunteer, and then it's amazing to watch how they love the community. So theology doesn't really have a place at the bridge, because it's participating in the love of Christ in our community, which has been absolutely amazing.
Yeah, that is great. So you mentioned that His Hands Auto, you built that behind the church on the church property.
Yes.
What ministries are on campus and which are off-site? And was there any type of like intentional plan with why they were placed there?
Well, Kids Creek Early Care and Education used to be Kids Creek Preschool. It's 45 years old, so it's been on our property actually longer than the church has been on the property. So we're in a new location as of 2000. So the preschool was part of the former location. So when the church moved over here, it was the church and it was the preschool. But I credit them, because even when I got here in 2008, it was Kids Creek Preschool. And if you come into our building, in the carpeting, it's almost like there's a creek running throughout the whole building, and that was Kids Creek.
I've actually never noticed that.
Yeah, actually, that's what that is.
Okay.
If you look at the carpet, there's actually like a flow, and it's actually like a creek, and it kind of goes throughout the building, and so it was designed for, this is our Kids Creek ministry. And so from day one, I think it's amazing that they said, yes, it's connected to Messiah, but it's separate. And it has given the freedom that it doesn't matter whether you're a believer or not a believer, a Christian, non-Christian, from the community, it doesn't matter. They would come to the early care and education and go, Kids Creek has a stellar reputation in a community, and they're sending their kids to Kids Creek. And it just so happens that it's connected to the church. So that's one of them.
Yep.
Another one is Journey's Coffee House. And Journey's started out in the church in 2007 when the addition was built. And it was put in, it looked like a little bit of a concession stand. That's what the coffee house looked like. And that's what I came in 2008. And then we built it out to make it look a little bit nicer. And then after COVID, we completely redesigned it and built it way into the whole area. I don't know if I would say lobby area, but this whole, it's quite extensive what we built out after COVID. But then we did have a location on Main Street too. And it was the church on Main Street, Journey's Coffee House. We quietly said it's the church on Main Street that doesn't look like a church, because it acted like a church. People gathered there. There was worship that happened there. There was community that was happening there. Christ was in that place. So we learned a lot about, like, how do you start a church that doesn't look like a church so that the community could participate, especially those who didn't know Christ. It was amazing. But unfortunately, that closed. Our rent went up 57%, and we were invited into what they call a triple net lease. It made it the cost insurmountable to run a ministry out of it, and the costs, so we had to close it. So the three ministries on campus are His Hands Auto Care in the backyard, Kids Creek, Early Care and Education, connected to the building, but a separate wing with a barrier just for safety and security. And then Journey's Coffee House has become our hospitality ministry at the main entrance. It's right at the main entrance, so that all these high schoolers come down and play ping pong at lunchtime.
So real quick, so that there are three ministries that are on campus,
Correct.
on site. And then there's Pivot Point, our appliance and job creation, The Bridge grocery store, and Gateway Healthcare. All of those are offsite.
And
Am I
housing.
missing any? And
Yes, the
housing.
housing.
And housing. So as we look at the principle of, like, don't put the stake in the ground as, like, this being your church, have you had to intentionally strategize that in a different way with the on-site ministries than the off-site ones?
We did. For example, let's go back to the garage, because I think that's a really good example. Like, we take care of cars, but we invite others to take care of the people. And what I mean by that is that, like, the garage has gone to churches and said, if you ever come across somebody in your ministry that needs help with car, we'll take care of the car, you help the person. And here be an example of that. So yesterday, I got a phone call from the Open Door, which is the men and women shelter in town. And they told me that they would really like to do something special for their employees. Not the homeless people that are there, because we already help them. But they're like, we'd like to do something for the employees. And I said, well, this is perfect. And I said, why don't you, because they work in Midland, they automatically qualify for a discount at His Hands Auto. So why don't you just send them over? We'll take care of their cars. And then I said to the Open Door, I said, you have the opportunity, which we have nothing to do with, that we cover the first 3 hours at a reduced rate of $50 an hour. Why don't you tell your employees that you'll cover hours 4 and 5, and maybe tell your employees that you're going to reimburse them for, say, $25 an hour. I don't want people to get lost in this, but we're supporting the Open Door employees. Then they would like to do something special for their employees. So it's wonderful. This is the principle. The church has the opportunity to go to an agency and support the agency, let the agency care for their employees, and we'll take care of the cars so they can take care of the employees. We do the same thing with the church. So when a church calls us and say, hey, we've got somebody in our church or in our community that needs car repair, we'd like to send them over to you. Would you send us the bill? And we're like, we're happy to do that. This is what we'll do for them. And then what do you want to do? And so the church has become, I don't know how to explain it. Like we're serving, the church is serving through the garage, other churches and other agencies. Those other churches are doing the ministry. We're doing the service on the car. It's an amazing concept.
Yeah. I'm just wondering how like churches and agencies have gotten to know that His Hands Auto, like it's directly behind the church. Like it's like the only way, like kind of no matter which direction you come from, like you know that it is on Messiah's property. And so like how have places come to know that like this is a place for us?
Well, we let a lot of agencies and churches know. We have a referral system at the garage because for every hour we work on a car, Messiah's tithe from the church, from our offering. As the church tithes, every hour that's worked on a car is what we reimburse the garage for. We don't just give them a check to help them. So if you come in, if you're a client and we work on your car for 3 hours, when Mike, he's our manager, submits that to the church, there's 3 hours discounted. So then the church writes a check to the garage for $150 as our tithe into the garage. That's how that works. So everybody needs a referral because otherwise we don't have enough resources to do everybody's car. So our garage is the only ministry that's limited to Midland County. You have to live or work in Midland County. If we open it up to everybody, we would just be bankrupt because we wouldn't be able to afford it. So churches will, we tell churches like, hey, I mean, we've got a pretty big database now of agencies and churches. Like, okay, there's been some changes with the referral form, so we send it all out to them. That was my conversation with the Open Door. We'll send you a new referral form out so that you can refer your employees to us. So we let every agency and every church verify household income. That's what qualifies you, along with living or working in Midland County. So it's very loose.
You've had to kind of like set some very strategic and intentional relationships with churches and nonprofits in the community. It wasn't just a like set up this social media page and voila, now you're your own thing, right?
Right. Actually, Lyndsay, you're really speaking of something that I think is the strength of these ministries. Is that every day, I mean, Mike gets about 130 phone calls a day.
That's insane.
I mean, think about how many phone calls that is. And it's coming in from suppliers, and phone calls are coming from agencies, senior services, Salvation Army, Caregiving Network, churches. The garage, boy, if you're listening to this, I think that's one of the most powerful things of these community ministries is when the church gets to serve an entire community and not just the people, but the garage is serving every agency because agencies they may have money to help with somebody's car repair. But when you have, and we ran into this, if an agency has $1,000 and goes to a garage and says, we have $1,000 to put towards this repair, inevitably that repair is always $1,000 or more, always. Because if somebody says, hey, I got $1,000 for you, that garage is going to take all $1,000. And they came to us and they actually thought we were doing something improper at first because they come to us and say, okay, we have $1,000 to put towards this repair. And we'd say, okay, it was $200. And they're like, what? It was only $200? Yeah, you can send 5 people over for the same amount because we're only doing the repairs necessary on the vehicle. So quickly, all of the agencies started to say, you know what, we can save money if we send them over to His Hands Auto, which is doing the quality work but cheaper. And they're really helping. And then we add our discounts to it, plus what they're doing. So the garage has become this amazing place of of helping the community.
So you mentioned a few minutes ago, that by churches kind of intersecting and playing well together at each of these ministries, it's helping them fulfill their God-given mission.
Yes.
How is it helping them fulfill their mission?
Because I believe God is calling every church to go make disciples of all nations. Let's go right back to Jesus. And I know we've talked about this, but I can't stress enough. The Bible is filled, start to end, with sending. I mean, God so loved the world that he gave. I mean, he sent Jesus into this world. And just as he was sent, he sends us. And he's sending the church. And so the church, really, when the church is really doing what God's called it to do, it's a sending church. So when we go to churches and say, you may be struggling to get into your community in some capacity, can we help you get into the community?
Yeah. And you've talked about this kind of like hierarchy or ladder or pyramid of there being, like, for one salvation to happen, that happens through relationships. For that one, it takes a strong base of interactions.
It does.
And if you don't have that base or that avenue of interacting with people that are outside of your church, like, how will God, like, allow your church to be that intersection for people that are outside of it?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, let's start with that. So the pyramid. If you have 1,000 interactions in the community, that just means you meet somebody and you have a conversation with them, or you just say hello to them and you get to know their name. We think it takes 1,000 to make 300, like, acquaintances. Like, oh, I think I met you before. From there, it takes probably, out of that 300, about 30 of them might turn into a relationship that you actually call that person by name. You can ask them how they're doing, ask them about their family. You know a little bit more about them. That might result in 1 or 2 people come into Christ. So if it takes 1,000, I think what we're learning is that for our church, all by itself, to have 1,000 interactions is a lot.
Yeah.
So what if we partner with 5, 10, 20 churches and agencies to all start having all the interactions? So that if all these interactions are taking place and then they're kind of funneled, let's say, through the garage, now they're coming in and Mike gets to meet them. And of those, he's getting to know 300 of them. Then he really gets to know 30 of them. And then this would be an example. So I was out in the garage. I like to go out in the garage and just pray with the guys, pray with the mechanics. And while I was there, one of our drivers walks in. And I know him well. And it's so fun. His name is Jerry. Walks in, looks like Santa Claus, you know.
I know the guy.
Walks in, and I just had a great conversation with Jerry. And it was really precious to hear somebody in a community driving for a local business, comes in and feels welcome, loved, cared for, called by name.
Yeah. So by starting something in your community, that not just opens the door for you as your church to start having these intersections with people who may never, ever enter the doors of your building. But if you take this principle and apply the principle to, we're not going to put the stake in the ground as this is our church's food ministry, but really this is for other churches as well. It's not only fulfilling the mission of your church, but it creates an environment for other churches that now we have a community. I don't think there's one community or city that has just one single church in the place. Like, it's very common for cities to have a lot of different churches. So it's giving the avenue for other churches to enter into that space and fulfill their mission. And isn't that what we want as believers? We want the individuals of the church to have a life that is fulfilling God's mission, and to have the church as a corporate structure mobilized to fulfill God's mission.
Yes.
And that's the point. So can I talk about an event really quick? So I think a lot of listeners, they probably don't have these ministries yet that they've started. Maybe they're thinking about them. Maybe they're just kind of playing with the idea of what would it look like to have a one-off event and have this principle applied. So could you talk about parent shopping night maybe? I think that's the most relevant for us in this. Like, how can churches have just one event that has this principle in action?
Yeah. Well, let's share the conversation because you are so aware of parent shopping night. I mean, parent shopping night started from Breakfast with Santa, and that was just gathering the whole community, having a phenomenal breakfast. Santa Claus was there, and we had a toy room. We added a toy room to it so where all the kids could go in and pick out a toy. And then it was that dad that I had a conversation with, and he said, Ed, I appreciate what you're doing, but you're giving out nicer toys than I can afford for Christmas.
Yeah.
So that's what spurred the decision to say, let's do a parent shopping night. So as a shopping night now, so about 3 days before Breakfast with Santa, we had about 1,000 toys. Parents could come in. We treat them the best we possibly can treat them. And they're allowed to pick out toys for about 25 cents on the dollar or less. And then we have all these freebies that we kind of throw in there to wrap the presents. But this would be another good example of 1,000 toys is too much for our church. So as we went out into the community, and of course, when you already have relationships in the community, now you're building on them so that when something else comes along and they go, oh, you guys are part of this too, we'd like to jump in with you. And like senior services, actually perfect example. Here's an agency, and they brought about 1/3 of the toys. And what they did, and I actually talked to the executive director a few weeks ago, and he said, here's what we did. Here's how we made it work, is that Fridays are jeans day. And we said, if you bring a gift, you can wear jeans. And then he decided, let's not just do it on Fridays. For weeks leading up to Christmas, to parent shopping night, you could wear jeans every day if you brought a gift every day. And so
that's fun.
The staff came with over 200 toys.
Wow.
And they got to wear jeans leading up to Christmas.
Wow.
And that's where 1/5 of all the toys came from senior services. So see, there's an example of here's how the church can help somebody else, an agency. But this is beautiful. The executive director goes to a different church. And so it wasn't part of his church. It was actually part of his work. And he was able to like fulfill for all of his employees, which I don't know where they are with the Lord, but here they were participating in something divine through their work, through an agency that the church underwrites. So if you follow all those steps,
Right.
the church is just an avenue. An event was an avenue, and it was called Parent Shopping Night.
Yeah.
Not Messiah's Parent Shopping Night.
Yeah. And even though it was at Messiah, we hosted it at the church for the community, there was just such like a camaraderie, especially this year. I just felt we were a lot more intentional with having drop boxes all over town and having a map of like where they were, asking businesses if they would contribute. And having stuff like even the creativity from other churches in businesses and agencies of like, this is how we want our employees to engage in this. And so at that night, I just felt this like immense caring for the community in this way, where it's like, this is not just, oh, this is our congregation and look at all the stuff that we did for you. But it's just like, this is the community caring for the community.
Yes.
And that was really beautiful.
I think a reputation slowly starts to develop that when the church doesn't put their name on everything. And so I kind of see it as that we're using Messiah's facility to serve this community. And so whether it's Parent Shopping Night or Breakfast with Santa, the community knows, hey, I know this is being hosted at Messiah, and it's getting the reputation that it's going to be really well done. We don't know what we're going to find. We don't really know how it's going to work, but it's going to be really well done.
Yeah.
So within the church, if you will, the church building is a lot of community ministry going on.
Yeah. So we're on the end of an episode, Ed, and it's that time for the call to action. Can you think of something that you can give the listeners to do before they go?
I think listeners should think about where they are, because I would imagine every church is somewhere in the process. So if they're listening to these podcasts along the way, I would imagine either there's a tremendous interest in doing this, I hope they start writing down these principles. I hope they start really taking to heart, like, how do we start to apply these? This is a principle we talked about. You can apply in any setting, anywhere. But what it takes is you got to drop the church name, and you got to think about, how are we going to serve the community on behalf of being a Christ follower, not necessarily as a denominational or non-denominational church member. You got to leave that behind. If I could give a quick example of this. So in a couple weeks, we've invited lots of pastors to come to the bridge, and they're going to run the store for a few hours. And I invited them, and I said, it may seem like it's a clergy day because all these pastors are going to be there. But when you walk through that door, you got to leave your church at the door, and you got to come in as your first name only. And we're going to give you the chance to love this community, maybe like you've never loved them before. Leave your church outside.
Yeah, so maybe that's a call to action also, if I were to just follow up with that, is if you're not starting something or thinking about starting something and applying this principle, maybe look for something that already exists. Look through another church that has a ministry and approach them and say, can we work together? Can we help? Can you help us fulfill our mission? We like what you're doing. Start there. I think it's a lot easier to join in on someone than to reinvent the wheel.
It's a great idea.
Awesome. We will see everyone next week. Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of Beyond the Breakwater, a podcast of Elevate Community Ministries. Don't let the conversation stop here. You can email us at hello@beyondthebreakwater.org. We would love to chat with you, answer questions, plan a visit, and help you take your next step. We'll see you next week.